Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode here at Catholic Table Talk Podcast. This is the podcast where everything Catholic is on the table. I want to welcome you again to this week's show, where we conclude last week's episode, or last week's show topic. With this week's topic is the same, the Spanish Inquisition. We're talking about the top 11 myths. Before we get to that, though, I want to thank each and every one of you once again for liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing to the show. Make sure you do if you have not already. And then as well, check out these other great videos on the top of the left hand corner. If you don't get them, check them out on our platforms. So, but like I said, if you have a show or a topic request, or speaker or your merchandise, whatever the case might be, sponsorship, email the official email of Catholic Table Talk, catholictt@gmail.com. Again, it's catholictt@gmail.com, the official email of Catholic Table Talk. Like I said, we'll talk about the last 5 myths of the Spanish Inquisition that most people either, maybe this is you, maybe you think these myths are true, or maybe you think so, but you're open to the possibility that they might not be true. Maybe you're a Catholic who doesn't know a whole lot about the Spanish Inquisition and the Catholic role in it. We're trying to help everyone become more aware of it and what actually happened. So last week we talked about myths 1 through 5, part 1, so go check out if you have not already. This week we're going to talk about myths 6 through 11. So let's just kind of dive into it a little bit from Catholic.com, just a little bit again. Many Catholics squirm at the very mention of the Spanish Inquisition, oftentimes conceding to claims that it was the most brutal time in church history. We'll talk about that coming up here, but was it actually as brutal as they were saying, as it was described? And then they talk about John Schussmeyer on Catholic.com talks about if you have never seen the BBC documentary The Myth of the Spanish Inquisition, I highly recommend it. It's a little over 45 minutes, but it summarizes the most recent scholarship about the Black Legend and how it began and why it persists. So why all these myths came about the Spanish Inquisition. It's kind of like the Reformation of all the denominations of the churches, It was just one true Holy Catholic Apostolic Church at the beginning, and then we saw that Luther fell away. He started his own church, which is now Lutherans today, and he made false claims about the church. So let's dive into these week's myths. Myth number 6, we got the Inquisition executed millions of people. The Inquisition executing really no one, rather they were handing over to the state. So think of it as like this, you have your sheriff, your marshal, whatever, policeman. They kind of go out they try to take down the bad guys, the bad people who's ransacking the town, these villages, whatever. They go out, take them in, and then they put them in jail. But they don't try them. Same thing with the Inquisition. Inquisition did not try anyone. That's how they didn't really execute anyone. Too many, at least to begin with, or later on, because, like I said, they weren't the judge and jury. They were just kind of almost, they just arrested them. So, the first 50 years of the Inquisition operations are poorly documented, but historians now agree that these were the bloodiest days and that perhaps many as 1,500 people may have been executed, or about 30 a year. Pointing out the fully recorded period of the 44,674 cases, only about 826 people were totally executed, which amounts to 1.8% of those brought to trial. Again, like I said, brought to trial, it was the Inquisition who tried them, it was the state. All told, then, during the entire period 1480 through 1700, only about 10 deaths per year were admitted out by the Inquisition all across Spain, a small fraction of the many thousands of Lutherans, Lutherans, and Catholics, in addition to two of his wives that Henry VII is credited with having boiled, born, beheaded, and hung. And hanged. Then, during the subsequent century, 1530 to 1630, the English averaged 750 hangings a year. So the English people, they hung a lot more people than, when even the state did. Many of them for minor thefts. In contrast, the few were sentenced to death by the Spanish Inquisition. Usually, if they were executed, they were often repeated offenders who wouldn't repair their sins, and that's from Rodney Stock's book, Bearing False Witness. That's from page 113. So that's myth number 6. Myth number 7 is the Spanish crown expelled the Jews from Spain because of anti-Semitism. Spain wasn't the only country to expel Jews. Pagan Roman historians say that Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome in AD 49. Jewish Inquisitional scholar Henry Kingman did not believe that the impulsive was due to anti-Semitism of the king and queen. Possible reasons: the Jews made up a society within a society. Muslims, while conquering Christian cities, appointed Jews to administer the cities as they moved on to the next target. This cooperation between Muslims and Jews may have wise sculptors. Ferdinand and Isabella were attempting to unite Spain under a single sovereign. Ferdinand of the Kingdom of Aragon and Isabella from Castile, toleration of minorities may have needed to re-inclined until the formation accord. So, basically, the Jews were a society within the society, and Muslims were putting Jews in all these ways of when they attacked the cities and were moving on to the next target. Myth number 8, the fear of false Muslim converts was unwanted. Muslim unwanted. Muslim converts to Catholicism in some areas of Spain made up a majority of the population. The problem of false converts to Catholicism was real. After a number of unsuccessful Monjo uprisings over the centuries, however, the Spanish authorities feel with justification the collusion of these Muslims with an increasingly powerful Islamic empire of the Ottoman Turks, with also Muslims in North Africa, and even the enemies of the Spanish crown, such as England, France, and the Protestants of Europe. So going on, therefore the Spanish authorities gave the Monjoyos, or the people who they got, the choice of either exile or assassination through their conversion to Christianity. Many of them left by choice of their free will to North Africa. They say, we're not going to convert from Islam to Christianity, but thousands of them converts, many of them only to avoid deportation. So that's why they converted. They weren't really faithfully Christian. They just they liked where they were. They didn't like it deport. These presumably converted Muslims were called Micros, but many is not. Most continued to practice Islam in secret, wear Muslim dress and veils, celebrate Ramadan, and speak Arabic among themselves. So basically, they were still practicing Islam. They were still, underground. several Mike School uprisings occurred involving stoning, dismembering, beheading, impaling, and boiling alive of Christians. The Spanish army put down these uprisings with great difficulty. It took them a while. Finally, between 1609 and 1614, the Spanish authorities expelled the Microsas from when they expelled them. So, hey, terrible thing, Muslim converts, they were converting, and you guys were throwing them out of the country, expelling them, and throwing them away, in prisons or wherever. Well, they were actually uprising against Christians and boiling Christians alive, and everything else that you could probably imagine. I don't know, I guess I'll let you be the deciding factor on that. So, myth 9 is probably the shortest myth there is for these. It's the Inquisition attempted to forcibly convert Jews and Muslims. Same thing. The Inquisition only had jurisdiction over the baptized. So, Muslims are not baptized. So, they only had jurisdiction over the baptized. So, anyone who wasn't baptized, they didn't have any jurisdiction over them. Myth number 10, the Inquisition was horrible cure even for its time. There are cases where people who were imprisoned by secular courts would blaspheme so that their cases could be heard by the Inquisition, because their judgments were more just and their punishments were comparatively more light than the state was. The state was really strict, hardcore. You got very, very bad penalties if you were caught lying, if you were a horrible criminal, all that other stuff. With the Inquisition, again, they didn't really trial that many people, and they didn't really trial a lot. But the criminals, I guess, anyone who wasn't with them, for in this case were against them, they wanted to be taken in by the Inquisition because they knew they were going to get killed for it. It's kind of like in World War II, when Germany was on its last legs. Many Germans wanted to surrender to the United States. Why? Well, because they betrayed Russia, so Russia was coming after them, and the prisoners of war camps were much more brutal. They were really brutal with their prisoners because Germany betrayed them during the war. Well, the United States dang it, so we took them in more. So same thing here. They went to the position to get captured, not by having the state come out and get them, because it'd be really more difficult times for them. So, last myth is probably the longest myth that we have, but it's myth 11, the Inquisition hunted witches. It is claimed that millions of people were killed in witch huts, and that the Inquisition led the way because the dire effects of celibacy, which inflamed priests to a waging campaign of revenge and the elimination of women. The witch hunting crazy is sometimes seen as a holdover from the Dark Ages that ended with the Enlightenment. The best estimate of the deaths caused by witch trials is not 9 million, like some may say, but around 60,000. Which, that in itself, 9 million from 60,000, that's a big difference. I'm not great at math, but you have to be great at math to figure that one out. From the year 1540 to 1640, 100 years, when the witch hut craze was at its peak, the Inquisition of Aragon, one of the two Inquisitions in Spain, so there was 2 Inquisitions in Spain, not just one, executed only 12 people for superstition and witchcraft. This should have been knowledge all along. Even the virtually anti-Catholic historian Henry C. Lee, who was around from 1825 to 1909, agreed that witch hunting was rendered comparatively harmless in Spain, and that this was due to the wisdom and firmness of the Inquisition. Stark, the author of the book this is kind of based off, believes that the Inquisition was careful to distinguish between the implicit and the explicit invocation of Satan. People, out of ignorance, used magic thinking that it was superstitious Christian thing to do. These acts would impulsively invite Satan to work under a Christian guise. As a result, very few people were convicted of knowingly invoking Satan. Negative reports by Inquisitions circulating in the church, which led to Catholic area to throw cold water on the frenzy, as Stark, a Lutheran of the book, claims, an effect that soon seeped into the Protestant areas as well. And then the last one here, still on myth 11. As for the Enlightenment, the witch hunting craze witches peaked during the Enlightenment. Thomas Hobbes wrote, "As for witches, they are justly punished." Jean Bodin served as a judge in several witchcraft trials and advocating burning witches in the slowest possible fires. Scientists like Robert Boyle encouraged witch hunts. So what there? Hey, a judge said, let's burn them all slowly in a fire. Let's just kind of build the fire up and burn them alive slowly. That's the best way. And then you have a scientist, Robert Boyle, who encouraged it. So, not necessarily from the Inquisition right there, is it? Here, some historians like to claim that witch hunting finally ended because it was attacked by participants in the Enlightenment, such as Balthasar Becker, but none of these enlightened attacks on witch hunts appears until nearly a century after efforts by Catholic clergy had discredited the witch craze and made it entirely safe to say such things. So, a lot to, I guess, digest, you could say, but yeah, like I said, some historians like to claim the witch hunting finally ended because it was attacked by participants, but actually, it was the Catholic clergy who had discredited the witch craze and made it entirely safe to say such things. So, the Catholic clergy basically discredited it, ended it, say, okay, you can say such things. So, so Catholics, the Inquisition did not, was it for witch hunting? Doing it? It was, like I said, a lot, you had a judge, you had the scientist, you had all that. So, very fictional, not fact. And like I said, we back them up by fact. That's what we do. So, a little bit more, I guess, about the Inquisition, and just a little bit more of a rundown for you, too. Just kind of overall story again. The Black Legend began as an anti-Spanish propaganda campaign that succeeded largely because of the invention of the printing press, which the printing press, of course, Benjamin Franklin. The Inquisition was a prime target. Inquisitions were not fashionable priests as they often portrayed. In fact, many of them were not priests at all, but legal experts trained in Spanish schools. Contrary to the popular belief, torture was rarely used. It was used less by the Inquisition than it was in tribunals of other countries throughout Europe at that time. Exactly. Like we talked about last week. Stories about cruel torture methods used by the Inquisitions and the terrible conditions in which prisoners were kept were completely falsified. The Inquisition had the best jails in Spain. Exactly, like we said there with the mist. Same thing like in World War II, like I said. Why did the Germans want to come to surrender to the Americans? Because the Americans gave them food, they gave them a place to stay, and there was a good jail. Or was it like they were getting tortured by the Russians or anything? Because, like I said, Germany betrayed the Russians during the war, so Russia was kind of still out taking its revenge on them. Prisoners of secular courts were actually blasphemed so that they could be transferred to the Inquisition prisons, exactly like we talked about, and it just like we escape the bad treatment of the state prisons. Prosecuting witchcraft was a craze in Europe at that time, and secular courts were not tolerant of these kinds of offenses. The accused were often born at the stake. The Inquisition, on the other hand, declared a witchcraft a delusion. No one could be tried for it or born at the stake. The Inquisition was virtually powerless in rural areas, like we talked about last week. In the entire 16th century, the Inquisition in Spain executed only about 50 people, which is contrary to the Black Legend, which numbers the executions of hundreds of thousands or millions as well. Of all the executions together throughout Europe, scholars estimate the number of people executed ranged between 3,000 and 5,000. The average is at most about 14 people per year throughout the entire continent over a period of 350 years. So 14 people a year for 350 years. 14 people. I mean, you just think of everything that's going on today. 14 people are killed, I mean, in cities almost in a couple hours. In some cities. And that's 14 people a year now. So the entire documentary, like I said, the myth of the Spanish Inquisition is on YouTube. I'll have the links up. So yeah, hopefully you learned something else about the final 5 myths of the Inquisition. Myth 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them down below. I'd love to answer them and get your feedback on today's show. If I should continue to do something like this, or if I should move on. So, hope you learned some more about the Inquisition. Check out the links below. Like I said, questions, reach out to me. And we'll see you next week right here on Catholic Table Talk Podcast, the podcast where everything Catholic is on the table.